Okay, good afternoon, followers and friends and subscribers and visitors. We're going to talk about another topic of Christian apologetics. And recall the last video I posted, I said I was going to start doing a series on challenging questions that often get tossed in our lap as apologists. And quite often, quite a few of the topics that we get pushed back on, we get questions about, deal with God versus science. It seems to be the foundation for a little bit of controversy between the theologian and the scientist. So what I'm going to do is we're going to spend a few minutes and first do a little overview of God versus science. What exactly is the controversy? How is it formed? What are some of the issues with it? And can we get to the point where we can actually have God and science agree on things and come together? So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. So on the God side of the controversy, basically the controversy arises from two different disciplines, theology and science. I mean, it's kind of obviously. Let's look at some of the history. Since the 1600s, the default meaning of the word God has changed. Literally from the Middle Ages all the way up to fairly recently, the word God was assumed to mean the triune, supernatural creator of the universe. Okay? The God that created everything. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. However, there has been a movement to discredit some of that and work towards what's called the God of the gaps. All right, where did this God of the gaps come from? If you go trace all the way back to Greek culture, you had the Zeus versus Yahweh, two different gods. There was the God of the Jews and the Christians, Yahweh, and the Zeus, the god of the Greek. And Zeus was a science stopper. Basically, science did not have the upper hand. Zeus did. And if you disbelieved in Zeus in that society, they would strike you down. No question about it. But then over the years, as the Christian God, the Jewish God, became more known, we started seeing more belief in God, as it says in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created, wait a minute, all things we didn't understand yet? I thought it was in the beginning God created heavens and the earth. Well, yeah, that's true. But what happened is over time, since the 60s, the concept of God's been changing to, in the beginning, God created all the things we didn't understand yet. What do you mean, all the things we didn't understand yet? Well, if we're starting to go down this route, we got to stop for a minute and look at a couple of things. If the definition of God is going from created earth and heaven to all the things we didn't understand, we've got to look at a couple of concepts. The first one is polysemy. If you look at the ancient languages, ancient Near Eastern Hebrew, Koine Greek, they had much fewer words in their vocabulary, yet they still had to talk about the same number of stuff. So quite often a word would be used in several different instances, different meanings. And so you have to be careful when you're reading the ancient Near Eastern Hebrew, whether or not the word that you're translating as one thing doesn't mean or couldn't mean something else. It's called polysemy. Got to be aware of that. On the science side, we got two things to worry about. When you're starting to analyze a situation, before you get into the analysis and collecting the data, you have to understand the point of view. The point of view. What is the point of view that I'm collecting the data from? Because that makes a big difference in what the data says. Particularly, we'll get back to it in Genesis 1:1. But the point of view can actually mean different things. The other thing is the starting conditions. What are the starting conditions for a particular analysis or data collection? Depending on what the starting condition is, the data could have different implications. So before we get too far into that, we have to realize we got to look at polysemy, we got to look at POV and starting conditions. All right, let's look on the God side. If you believe the God of the gaps, then you must choose God or science. What does that mean? All right, so basically, God of the gaps is if you're trying to explain something and you didn't know how it worked, but you were a theologist, a God believing person, then you would just say, well, I don't understand it, but I know God made it. God did it. He's doing it his way. Therefore, it's God's. What you're doing then is actually filling in the gaps of your knowledge with it's God's doing. And that's called God of the gaps. Well, if you choose God of the gaps, then you've got to choose between God or science. Why? Well, because there are two ways we can get to the answer. We don't know yet. And where is it? Why is it not coming up here? All right, here we go. So if you believe God is just a placeholder until science finds the answer, then science must win. All right. So if you think science eventually will get the right answer, then you're using God as a placeholder just to explain something until a better answer comes along. The problem then is your definition of God. If science is all of nature, there's the entire universe, everything in it, everything about it, you and everything you see, if that is all the universe and it is all considered the natural world, the creation of the universe, and the universe is all it is, then God is supernatural. He's outside of the universe. But wait a minute, if the universe is all there is, what is supernatural? Okay, well, we got a problem. If God is not a God of the gaps, then new science doesn't replace God. It actually enhances God's omnipotence. What do I mean by that? Let's look at the cell, the human cell, part of the body, your skin, your blood cells, your brain cells, and whatnot. Back many years ago, hundreds of years ago, the cell was considered just a blob of protoplasm. Go back to the days of Lewontin and Hooke. Lewontin invented the microscope, and Hooke used that microscope to look at some cork cells. He looked at the slice of cork, and he came up with this blob that was kind of like little bubbles. He called them cells. He saw some stuff in it. It was just stuff. He called it protoplasm, and that was the cell. Well, what did that do? Well, we don't know. Well, if all we do is say, well, God does stuff inside the protoplasm, then we're using God of the gaps. If we spend more time, more science, more study on it, we'll figure it out. And along comes Schleiden and Swan. Schleiden and Swan in the 1860s, they start looking at cells and they're starting to see structure inside the cells, things like nucleus, cell wall, and other kinds of lumps. So obviously something in here is doing stuff of the cell. Then zipping over to the 1800s to the mitosis. A fellow by the name of Fleming, doing some studies and looking at cells, noticed that cells divide. One cell becomes two cells through a process called mitosis. And all these stringy things in the nucleus called chromosomes, they'd line up, pair up, pull apart, stretch away, split into two, and you get two new cells, each with a copy of the chromosomes that the original cell had. And so that was how cells grow, how they replicate, and answered a lot of questions about cells. Well, did it answer all the questions? No. In the late 50s, early 50s, Crick and Watson looked at these chromosomes and found they were made of DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and DNA turned out to be almost like a computer code, a strand of DNA with 4 different chemical coupling units in between them as base codes, could be used to code the instruction set to build certain proteins out of certain amino acids and basically build the body, build all the coding of the body, build everything you needed to know about how the body worked. And they assumed that was the answer. But wait a minute, did the protein building do everything? Well, no. In fact, as they studied the chromosomes, they found that only 2, 3, maybe 4% of the chromosomes of the DNA actually did anything. Everything else looked like it was junk DNA. And the more we studied, we found that, but well, going old, that junk DNA was doing stuff. It was doing gene regulatory networks and all sorts of control functions. So it's beginning to lead us to believe that, yeah, if we study more, we may find out more, and it will further reduce the need of a God filling the gaps concept. And that's on the science side. Well, still looking at the science side, if TSM is all you acknowledge, what is TSM? TSM stands for time, space, material. The entire universe being created, Big Bang, from nothing, everything we see, hear, taste, feel, smell, everything that exists today that we can measure and analyze, considered the universe. And the universe contains all the time, all the space, all the material. Material is actually material and energy, but all the TSM, everything, if that's all you acknowledge, if everything you can see and study and work with is TSM, then your MISI may be broken. There's another term. What in the world is MISI? Well, MISI stands for mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. This is a method of doing decisions so that you get the correct answer. For example, say my question was, how many different ways could I arrange the letters A and B? Well, I could have AA and AB and BA and BB. So there's 4. 2 different things arranged 2 different ways. 2 times 4. I have a solution set of 4 possible answers. And one of those may be my answer. If I had 3 things, A, B, C, then it would be 3 times 3, or 9 different solution set pieces. And if it's mutually exclusive, that means that each one of those items in the solution set are unique. You can't have 2 meaning the same thing. And collectively exhaustive means that every possible answer you could possibly come up with must be included in the solution set, or you may end up picking something that is wrong and not picking something that should be there. So mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, that's the way we make decisions. But if TSM is all you acknowledge, your MISI may be broken. Let me give you an example. Is that a straight line? Does that look like a straight line to you? You know what a straight line looks like. I'm assuming you said no. You know what a straight line looks like based on a standard. You've seen straight lines. A straight line goes from A to B without movement left and right. It's not bends, no jagged curves. It's a straight line. That becomes the standard. You need a standard to measure against to answer the question, is that a straight line? Let me ask a question a little bit more difficult. Is torturing babies just for fun good or bad? Now, I've asked this question of a lot of folks in a lot of places, a lot of times, from a lot of backgrounds, and get the same answer. Torturing babies is not good. It is bad. Torturing babies for fun. And I think you could ask this question of someone in the middle of the Amazon rainforest that had never met a civilized person in their entire life and still get the same answer. You can ask someone in Africa, Asia, Middle East, anywhere, and you're going to get the same answer. Torturing babies just for fun is bad. It's not a good idea. Well, how do we know that? How do we know that it's bad? We need a standard. Well, where does the standard come from? Torturing babies just for fun. Where does that standard come from? If that question, when asked of anybody, everywhere, anytime, in any culture, come up with the same answer, then that standard must be outside of time, space, material. Because my time, space, material is different than your time, space, material. Now, you may have learned yours from mom and dad. I may have learned my answer from school or reading a book, but it was a different standard. How do we get the same answer? We have to make that standard outside of TSM, supernatural. The standard has to be supernatural. So, without supernatural, we run the risk of not including in our solution sets some of the answers, some of the possible answers that are outside of time, space, and material. So if something exists outside of TSM, like supernaturally, like God, we don't include it in our selection of answers, and we end up making mistakes. Our MISI is broken. All right, on the science side, the science explanation is, well, if you give me enough research, if you spend enough money, if you go ahead and hire enough doctorate candidates to go out and do research, we'll get your answer. And there's no answer we can't get if the funding's enough and enough time. We'll get there. Well, really, is that true? Let's look at an example. Here is a natural law called gravity. We're all familiar with gravity. And after many, many years of study and Newton getting bonked on the head with an apple, we come up with this formula. Force is equal to the gravitational constant times the mass of one item and the mass of another item divided by the square root of the square of the distance between them. So G equals mm over r squared, and that is the law of gravity. But this is epistemology. Epistemology, and I'm going to introduce the word epistemology and ontology. Epistemology is how you know something, where you learn something from. And how do we know this law of gravity? Well, we've studied it and we've developed it, we've tested it, and it was published in a book, and I went to school and I learned about it, and therefore I learned that this is the law of gravity. That's my epistemology. Does that say what gravity is? No. It tells us how it operates, how it behaves, but not what it is. So basically, what I want to know is, what is it? I want to know the ontology. What is gravity itself? And bottom line, as much money as we spend on science and experiments, we still do not have a definitive answer on what gravity is. Is it exchanging particles called gravitons? Is it gravity waves protruding to the universe? We're not sure yet. Is it quantum? Is it quantum gravity? Again, it's up in the air. So there is a difference between how we know what something is and what something actually is. And it's possible to have something like a law that we understand and work with called gravity, but really not how it works. So let's look at another example. Why is the water boiling? Well, we see a flame heating a metal pot, making water molecules vibrate, and they bounce off the other molecules and they leave the water as steam. Okay, so that's how water boils. But wait a minute, isn't that the epistemological answer? That tells us the how. It tells us how we learned it. Maybe we boiled some water. Maybe we watched our mom boiling some water. But that's only the half of the answer. That's the epistemological answer. That's the science answer. All right. What's the other half of the answer? The other half is, I want a cup of hot tea. That's why I'm boiling water. I'm not boiling water just for the fun of it. I'm boiling water because I want a cup of hot tea. And that agency, that is called agency. The ontology has to include both what it is and why it's being done, agency. So when you decide to do something, you are in fact initiating the doing. You are the agency by which it gets done. And if you didn't want to do it, it doesn't necessarily happen. All right? So the two explanations are necessary to explain why the boiling water. How does that relate to gravity? Well, the two explanations of gravity is, well, that formula says how it works and how it does. But why is it doing that way? Where did it come from? Who invented gravity? Who created gravity? Who is keeping gravity working? That's the agency side. And science hasn't answered that one yet. So the MISI must include the science side, time, space, material, and the agent intention. Science does not replace agency. It enhances the awesomeness of agency. As we get deeper and deeper and deeper into the complicated things that we study and find out they're happening amazingly, what that says is the agency behind it that's driving it is awesome. Awesome. All right. So it turns out it's really not a controversy between God and science. It's really kind of the science acknowledge agency. Let's look at that. Today, the cell is considered an extraordinarily complex factory of molecular machines, and the agent is driving it all. Remember I said the deeper you get into it, the way that it's working is more and more amazing. It's kind of hard to believe that there's not an agency behind what's going on. Let me show you a little video to give you an example.
Here, the two strands of DNA are being unwound and separated by the tiny blue molecular machine called helicase. Helicase literally spins as fast as a jet engine. The strand of DNA on the right has its complementary strand assembled continuously, but the other strand is more complicated because it runs in the opposite direction. So it must be looped out with its complementary strand assembled in reverse, section by section. Guide and help align them in the correct position. The microtubules are connected to the chromatid at the kinetochore, here colored red. The kinetochore consists of hundreds of different the microtubules. For a reason no one's yet been able to figure out, the microtubules are constantly being built at one end and deconstructed at the other. While the chromosome is still getting ready, the kinetochore sends out a chemical stop signal to the rest of the cell, shown here by the red molecules, basically saying this chromosome is not yet ready to divide. The kinetochore also mechanically senses tension. When the tension is just right and the position and attachment are correct, all the proteins get ready, shown here by turning green. At this point, the stop signal broadcasting system is not switched off. Instead, it is literally carried away from the kinetochore down the microtubules by a dynein motor. That's the walking guy. This is really what it looks like. It has long legs so it can avoid obstacles and step over the kinesins, molecular motors that walk in the opposite direction. Personally,
Okay, so personally, it blows me away. It tells me that the fingerprints of agent is everywhere. Time-space material, it doesn't answer at all. The agency is out there too, and the agency is supernatural. And the more we study science, we're not replacing gaps. We're actually understanding how wonderful and awesome is the agency. So, quick summary. On the God side, the Misi is broken when we do not acknowledge that science can explain some new things. There is some things beyond literally the theological definition. If our choice is between God and science, but we refuse to acknowledge anything other than God, because the Bible tells us, and it does, God can do anything he wants, anywhere he wants, anytime he wants, anyhow he wants. And the Bible basically tells us, one form of fashion or another, basically everything he's done. So those are all the options I need in my Misi. I don't need the options that talk about things that are not God. So what tends to happen is the more religious a person focuses their decision making on, the more they focus on part of the solution set and ignore the other half of the solution set. But is that just God happening? Well, God can do everything he wants. I talked about that. The Misi can't be broken. The predominantly accepted explanation from the popular version of the Bible tells us all we need to know. So basically, I only need God as my answer. I only need the Bible to tell me how and why. And because the Bible is the Word of God, and that's all we need to know, we don't have to look at the last anything else. So that's the half of the Misi that is missing when you come at things from the God side. And polysemy and critical study of all 66 books is not necessary. We don't have to try to find other possible explanations. So that's what we're talking about on the God side. On the science side, it is also broken, because on the science side, materialism, which is the concept of everything is DSM, everything came when the universe was created, time, space, material, everything that exists is time-space material. If it's not something time-space material, it's a random occurrence. And if it's not a random occurrence in time-space material, then it's unknown. But all we need is more money, more science, more experiments to answer the question. So materialism throws away everything that is supernatural on the possible solution set, and they break the Mises. Supernatural is just not in their solution set. As science advances, we need more study. Give me more funding, and that's basically the side of the solution set that they focus on. They have not studied the entire Bible for possible answers because they don't necessarily think that God is needed. So there's the dilemma. Their Mises is broken on the God side, and the Mises is also broken on the science side. But the question is, does it have to be? Is that necessary? Is God and science compatible? Well, if we allow ourselves an unbiased analysis says we use the entire solution set, even the ones we don't like, and we analyze the ones we don't like to say, is it possible that this may be true also? If we look at things like from the God side, a polysemy, point of view, starting conditions, we read critically the words of the Bible. We read like Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, the three things he created, the beginning, heavens, and the earth. Well, in the beginning he created those things. How much time did it take him to create those things? 1 day? Thousands of days? Thousands of years? Who knows? And then the point of view on the second verse, and God is hovering over the deep waters in darkness. What's the point of view? You see, God's point of view, the Genesis 1:1, has just gone from a point of view of God outside of the universe, creating time-space material, everything. In verse 2, he is now on earth, floating in the water, under the clouds, looking at this formless void. We've had a major change in point of view. And these are the sorts of things we have to be willing to look at, to answer, to analyze all the possible solutions. So with an unbiased analysis and an open mind, I think the answer is yes. And that's why over the course of the next few videos that I'll be putting up on the website, we'll look at as much as possible, as much as we know how, we'll look at the complete solution set to our challenging questions and let you make the decision. Let you pick the solution set item that you think makes sense, but at least we're going to try to do it with an unbiased analysis and an open mind. And with that, we'll tackle the God and science question. And I thank you for listening. And hopefully, shortly, I'll be go ahead and publishing some more of these. Thank you very much.